honestly when, then you'll hear from me. Welcome back, everybody, to the Open Learning Micro-Credential Symposium. I hope you've enjoyed our sessions this morning. There's been a lot of chatter, a lot of feedback, and a lot of questions posed, and hopefully some of those have been answered as well along the way. We've got a great afternoon schedule for you with 2 more panel sessions, some wonderful people that are doing some wonderful things. The panel session this afternoon is entitled, How Can Micro-Credentials Strengthen the Connection Between Education Providers and Industry? And with that, I'm going to pass you over to our chair, over to our chair, well, pardon me, we just followed something, Claire Field, and I hope you enjoy this afternoon. So over to you, Claire.
Welcome, everybody. Hope you had a lovely lunch break. And thanks to Grant and Cherie and the team at Open Learning for the opportunity for me to join this brilliant panel of speakers to talk us through micro-credentials and strengthening that using them to strengthen that relationship between employers and education providers. I'm going to do some quick introductions, although I'm sure that everyone on the panel will be well known to all of you. Starting with Eve Ollerenshaw, who is the Group Quality Accreditation and Compliance Manager at ASX-listed RedHill Education. Eve doesn't just have a long history in the sector, she's also a board member of the independent peak body IHEA, as well as, we were having a little bit of a chat before, quite a sporting aficionado. So if we do run out of time to talk on micro-credentials, we're going into sport. So keep those questions coming towards the end if sport is not your thing. Also joining us is Craig Robertson, who likewise has had a very long and distinguished career in the sector, including very senior roles in the Commonwealth and Victorian Public Service, and currently the Chief Executive of TAFE Directors Australia. Craig, welcome. And finally, Simon Hann, who is the Group Executive Education and Learning at Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, not forgetting the Kiwis. And Simon, that's a role that you've come to, again, after we've all had lengthy careers in the sector, including most recently as the Chief Executive of Deakin University's corporate arm, Deakin Co. So I think everybody, you will agree with me. We've got 3 excellent speakers to talk us through the relationship between employers and educators and how micro-credentials can help. And I've asked each of our panellists to start off by giving us an example. Like, we have quite a lot of theory when we talk about micro-credentials, but I thought we'd start with some practical examples. So, Simon, I might turn to you first if I can. Can you give us an example of a relationship between a provider and industry and how that was strengthened in the development or the delivery of a micro-credential?
Thanks, Claire. Very happy to, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give 2, but I'll keep them short if that's okay, because they sort of give 2 different examples. And this is going back to my days as CEO of Deakin Digital or Deakin Co. As part of Deakin University, and very much pioneering in many ways the development of industry-based micro-credentials. The first was a partnership with ADMA, the Association for Data-Driven Marketing and Advertising. They were looking to create some micro-credentials around some specific emerging fields like digital marketing, data-driven marketing, and these were fields that weren't really well represented from a traditional education provider perspective in terms of courses or programs. It was really jobs and skills that were emerging in the industry. And in working with them, we're able to bring that education framework or that academic framework, if you like, to help them actually frame up and describe what those skills were, what those specific capabilities were, and give them some structure beyond just how they were appearing in jobs. So I think that was a really nice combination of something that was a new and emerging skill and capability that we're able to work in collaboration and frame up something that really described that both educational institutions could relate to in terms of how they might interpret and value those micro credentials, but also from an industry perspective to give them some credibility. The second was working directly with one of the big four banks, and they were interested in a micro-credential around customer service. And they had a program in place, and what they were looking for is a micro-credential that they like the academic connection or the university connection with Deakin University to provide, that sort of credibility or rigour for the people that were doing these micro-credentials. But they didn't necessarily want to impose any unnecessary training or assessment beyond what they're already doing to develop their customer service program. And so that was really interesting working with them. And we had an assessment methodology ultimately that looked at collecting evidence based on what they produced doing their job, formed the basis of the assessment as opposed to overlaying any additional assessment activity or assessment tasks. So it was one of those really authentic on-the-job assessment pieces that sort of embedded in the workflow and worked really well from that perspective. So they got the benefit of the academic recognition, if you like, of being associated with a university brand, and we got to tap into working with a program that was core to their strategic purpose at the time. So both of those good examples, I think.
Terrific. And in strengthening the relationship, it went on to other things. You did other things with those organisations?
Yeah, so ultimately, I've been left that organisation for a couple of years now. So where they're currently at, I'm not entirely sure. But from they were sort of very much pioneering, and I think that we're probably still in a period of where we're educating the market around what micro credentials are and sort of determining what the currency or the value is. But that was certainly a great starting point for that.
Terrific, thank you. And Eve, at RedHill or elsewhere, did you want to give us an example or maybe two and talk about how that worked in the relationship between the employers and yourselves?
Yeah, sure, Claire. Thanks very much. And hi, everybody. Look, I'm going to give a couple of examples. RedHill owns a number of education providers, and under that has a number of brands. So one of its providers is an interior design school. And so during the course of late last year and most of this year, we've been working in partnership with Civic Magazines and also in partnership with Haynes Paints. And we've had a long-term relationship with those guys as our industry partners, where they were coming in and participating in our accredited qualifications in interior design and interior decoration for probably about 8 or 9 years, I think, between them. But what we did this year, particularly with them, was with the support of Open Learning and using their platform, was actually create some non-accredited short courses. With Pack Mags, it was all about interior decoration and design and how you can become a designer yourself. The idea was you had no skills, but you had a passion and an interest. And this was something that came out of research they'd done with their consumers, readers of their magazines. Particularly, I think Inside Out was one of the magazines where that sort of had come through. So the idea was that we were taking accredited content, we were layering it down, simplifying it, making it more digestible, no assessment, but lots of activities, etc. So that by the end of a 6 to an 8 week period, the participants in the course had developed a portfolio. That portfolio was something that gave them a level of comprehension and understanding about decoration within a residential setting, but also then was something that would allow them to articulate, if they wanted to, into a certificate for interior decoration, diploma of interior decoration, either with us or with other providers around the country. It was a very positive experience. I think we had about 185 students all up enroll in it over about a 3-term cycle. The Haynes Paints one was quite different. They approached us as I say, having been a long-term partner and of International School of Colour and Design. And they said that we want to deliver something on colour to our staff and to our consultants who sell our products. So we actually sat down with them and wrote a course in partnership from scratch, and then that was released through the Open Learning platform to all of their employees. So I think it was about 45 in the end who may well have done that course. And those were both really positive experiences, and obviously contributing to consumers from two different perspectives. In other words, one set trying to get entry, the other set qualifying and quantifying a set of skills that they were utilising on a regular basis, and probably upskilling to an extent.
And giving your educators insights into what's happening in both of those parts of the industry at a deeper or different level, I'm guessing.
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, the Haynes Paints one was great because it almost worked as professional development for our trainers, because there they were working with a company that is doing paint. The Pacific Mags one, they weren't working with the magazine itself. But yes, certainly what they were learning more is who are our potential consumers and how would we respond to them if they enrol in our accredited courses, which was really good.
Fantastic. So that potential pipeline. And Craig, there's a lot of examples across the TAFE network that you can't share them all. We will limit you to just a couple, but please talk us through some of your examples.
Easy, no worries. Well, of course, across the vet sector generally and TAFEs as well, there are probably thousands of industry-defined micro-credentials because there are skill sets, and an individual can essentially come in and choose one or two units that make sense to them. It's accredited. It's effectively a micro-credential. So that's in the accredited space. Let's play outside the accredited space for a while. One of the examples is being developed in one of the TAFEs in aged care, and it's really around, I guess, professional, personal development. It's around those interpersonal skills, capabilities that aged care providers and sort of residents of aged care facilities are expecting. It's not in the formal space. The other interesting one is a lot of work we do internationally, and so there is an example in the international space called the International Skills Training Certificate. It's not accredited, but it's based upon the TAE. And what that's trying to do is to get the essence of the training and assessment qualification, but deliver it really in a different context.
Fabulous. And I'm guessing that similarly for the TAFE Institute that you mentioned, that non-accredited example with aged care, similarly they're getting new and other insights and building additional opportunities to do more work with that employer or others in the sector over time.
That's right. I guess one of the themes is it's more B2B, as Eve was mentioning earlier on. It's how to respond to those specific needs of the business.
Fabulous. Thank you. Great question come in from David Duncan for you, Eve, which I should have thought to ask. So did you experience much take up into your accredited courses from the students, the Pacific Magazine readers, the students who went through those short courses, or I guess the paint workers?
Yeah, well, the Haynes Paints one, where there was about 45 staff and contractors, we got about 4 or 5 enrolments out of that, which we actually weren't expecting because that really wasn't the drive. It's really about supporting a particular target market and upskilling them, as I said before, but also consolidating our partnership with Haynes Paints to contribute to a whole pile of other things within the business. So yeah, to get some students out of that was really positive. The Pacific Mags one probably didn't get as big an uptake as we want. It was about 20% maybe of the students. And we were being ambitious maybe and wanting about 40% uptake. But that's because we probably didn't really understand the market well enough when we went into it. So we were overestimating their motivation to actually do more study than simply a micro-credential. Most of them were actually, that's all they wanted.
Yeah.
I've got that. I'm happy. I now can talk to the consultant when they come into my house to do the painting and say that you should, and I can go and walk into Harvey Norman and say, no, I don't want that teal blue lounge. I want that oatmeal coloured one. And that's great. And that's fine.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Peter, I've seen your question coming in, but before we get to that specific issue, we've started to talk a little bit about a challenge, which is you've designed these courses, you're working with employers, you've got some expectations, and then you put it into practice, and you're all learning as you go along. So I wanted to ask each of you about the challenges that you found in these relationships, and how you've addressed them. We all want the solutions and the magic answers. And Simon, I'm going to start again with you, please. We'd like lots of good. We'd like to know the challenges. Want lots of answers, please.
Look, I think the one that stands out, and if you take a step back, ultimately the value that attributes to a micro-credential is based on the reputation of the issuer and the assessment methodology for the credential. So how do you earn that micro-credential? And I think, and this is going to be a little bit simplistic, but from an education provider, our assessment models have always been very geared towards, your more typical knowledge assessments, exams, those types of more traditional assessment activities. I think from the industry perspective, they're more looking at what does this mean for on-the-job performance? Can we see a skill that's been developed and that application of that skill in the workforce? And that's quite a different assessment methodology than perhaps where some of the education providers come from. So I think that the tension then exists between that trying to land an assessment methodology that works within the flow of learning, within the flow of work within the industry partner, that, you know, sort of referenced before, the example with the bank, that we're assessing work artifacts that are produced by the person applying the skill that we're looking to micro-credential. And I think that gets further exacerbated when we start to looking at trying to assess micro-credentials in the area of the professional skills or soft skills. So things like communication, problem solving, critical thinking. These are all really important skills that industry now values more highly than ever, particularly with you know, what's happening with the future of work and the impact on jobs and the you know, the rise and the importance of having those soft skills. And that's not something certainly embedded in education providers' curriculum, but perhaps something that we haven't always been great at measuring or assessing. So I think it's that tension between the assessment methodologies that can throw up some challenges, but also some really good opportunities to land something pretty special. And I think that's where the ultimate value of a micro-credential comes out.
And so do you think then, because I think, you know, assessment is a huge issue, and Craig, I'm coming to you next, because, you know, if the universities are struggling with knowledge versus work, how do you assess work artifacts? Well, you know, surely TAFE and the vet sector have the solution. But before that, Simon, so were you at, excuse me, Deakin long enough to start to see what you were learning in the micro-credential space and your work with employers? Was it starting to influence any of your assessment practices in longer or more formal courses?
Absolutely. So, and again, this sort of comes back to the currency piece. From an industry perspective, is the value around employability skills and helping people, you know, get a better job or get a different job or move into different workplaces, roles, or is it around getting that credit towards formal qualifications? And I think well-designed credentials can do both, but there can exist a tension, I think, between those two things. But well-designed, good partnerships should be able to tick both of those boxes.
Very good. Okay, so Craig, you vet sector, TAFE's got all the answers to this. Surely that's not a challenge. That's not a challenge that your members are facing.
Well, you know, it's a really interesting irony that's going on in the sector at the moment, where everybody's talking about these interpersonal skills, 21st century skills, etc., and people are jumping into micro-credentials outside of the competency system to be able to acquire them. But in some ways, if you go back to the competency history, it is about demonstrating those, practicing and demonstrating those behaviours in complex situations. So somehow we've got to try to reconcile all of that. And I wonder what's going on is micro-credentials is the new black, but also because it just gives a bit more flexibility to the provider, our TAFEs, to respond to local circumstances where they feel that possibly the training package construct doesn't allow that. It should, and it could, but there's perceptions that it doesn't. So that's where the micro-credentials are coming into play. The big strong one for us is a stronger focus on the knowledge components. Again, part of training packages, sort of, they're a bit difficult to see how they play out. Micro-credentials can help in that way.
That's the two together. Similar challenges and issues or different ones across the providers in the RedHill group?
Yeah, look, they're those sorts of challenges are there. They've always been there. I mean, I've played around with micro-credentials since before the modern vet era, so more than 25 years worth. They've always been there. I'm going to pick up on Craig's comment. I think they were the black economy. Now all of a sudden they're potentially the primary economy, and conservative or conventional accredited qualifications will be the underling. But no, I want to pick up on a slightly different perspective, because at the end of the day, there's got to be a commercial relationship in place. And you can do everything academic and have a wonderful product, but it gets eroded or undermined by a whole pile of other variables. So in thinking about the question while Simon and Craig were talking, I sort of came up with, I'm reading some prop notes I made, some areas, is that you really need to be on the same page as the partner, as in what do you want to get out of it, just as much as what will the product be and who the consumer will be. You've got to be very, very much aligned with each other on the same page. your partner, your industry partner you need to share with them and help them develop an understanding of pedagogy. Because if they don't understand that, then their expectations about a product or what a product can be and how it can achieve their goals will be completely distorted and misaligned. Investing time into getting them on the same page, developing some basic levels of understanding of pedagogy is an absolute critical. Then the other things is that you need an agreement. Now, without an agreement in place, then it will break down, because without an agreement, you don't know whose responsibility is X and Y and Z. You don't know who has accountabilities for X and Y. You haven't got some sort of differentiation over how much you're going to spend on certain things, and you certainly don't have anything about who's going to pay for what and who's going to take share of the profit. So getting all of that aligned is absolutely critical. And I think it's critical as having a really cool, sexy product. And for me, they've been the biggest things that I've actually worked on in all the many partnerships that have been in place.
So you're right. We've got the sexy new black, whether it's coming from the black economy or it's just the new thing. But actually, there's a lot of fundamentals in working with partners that need to be locked in for the relationship to be successful. Simon, I'm going to go to you now with the question from Peter, and he's had a response from Lenora, so thank you for that. You can see if you agree or not. So Peter's sort of framed an issue, particularly in the university sector, about micro-credentialing and perceptions as to whether they're suitable and appropriate or not. Do you think that, so he asked specifically, do you think we can leverage the power of micro-credentials without running into concerns at the badging end that people might be misguided or not understand that in doing a micro-credential, it's not necessarily the same as a subject, it might or might not count for further study? How are you going to unpack those perceptions or misperceptions? And Lenora's, just so we're all on the same page, Lenora's suggestion is it's how you position macro versus micros. The macros are point in the journey, not the destination. And each type of credential plays a role. And I do understand, not that I'm intimately familiar with it myself, but that's, I sound like I'm doing marketing now, but that's what the open learning platform allows, right? Small pieces to add into bigger chunks. So Simon, do you agree with Lenora? What's your experience? How do you get around this perception issue?
Yeah, and thanks, Peter. Unless there's a couple of Peter Dangles out there, Peter and I work together. So, hello, Peter.
Very good. Well, we've got that. Peter in his place.
Dixon.
That's right. Look, I think for me, everyone understands the macro quals because they've been around. Everyone knows what a diploma is, a bachelor and a master's, and what's involved in achieving them. And we go back to the reputation of the issuer in terms of how we value them. Whether it's from a prestigious university or whatever that looks like, and every degree has its place. I think the reason, the rise of micro-credentials is all about the fact that those macro quals aren't suited for everyone. I mean, they're long, they're expensive. You don't necessarily need those to get a job or to get the piece of learning or the skill that you need, and that's why micro-credentials have started to populate. So I think it just comes back to this education piece around recognising the currency or the value of a micro-credential, and being really clear, it's measuring typically a small specific piece of whether it's skill, knowledge, whatever the micro-credential's measuring, and we get that well articulated through the metadata that comes through the digital badge attached to the credential. So I think it's an education process and recognising that micro-credentials present a more agile and accessible framework, if you like, than perhaps what the traditional macro qualifications. And I'm not a doomsday that think that the end of macro qualifications is here. There's still an absolute place for those, and there will be for some time to come. But this just creates a whole level of access and enablement that wasn't there previously.
Brilliant, thank you. And Simon, you'll be relieved to know it's a different Peter Nangle. It's his evil twin, okay? So that's who the question came in for. Eve, you talked about segmenting up parts of your qualifications and using the platform to do that. Have you had, and I should say for those who don't know, so your institutions cover both higher education and vet. Yep. Have you had those sorts of issues, perceptions, And if so, how have you got around that?
Look, yeah, those perceptions are out there. They therefore present issues for the providers. As you say, we've been doing micro-credentials in one form or another to both vocational or align with our vocational courses as much as our higher ed. But when we haven't really run into big issues around, at the end of the day, around it, because we're actually doing our marketing and aligning it to the type of consumer. So there are consumers there who have qualifications. You're building courses that are adding on to what they already have. Therefore, they have an understanding of how subjects accumulate to get a degree or units of competency accumulate to get a qualification, etc. Then you've got a whole bunch of people out there who have never done anything post-school, and they may even have left school at age 15, 16. Their needs are completely different. The way that you construct that course and selling them is completely different to the other group. So therefore, if you're actually separating the two groups, you don't run into those sorts of issues. And I think while Simon was talking, I was thinking a really good example is my own eldest son, who has created a career as in the ski resort sector, and he's a professional snowmaker, which sounds like a pretty strange thing. But there is no qualifications around that. But what he needed to do was acquire a series of skills. So he needed to have his construction safety card for New South Wales, and another one for New Zealand, and a different one for Canada, and none of them are transferable, etc. They're not actually qualified. There are, in essence, micro-credentials. But he also needed to have a license for a certain sized engine in a deep piece of machinery so he could drive a snowplow. He needed technical skills around computing software so that he could write the program to adjust the snow at 2 o'clock in the morning on, Lake Louise ski resort. He needed to have some basic plumbing principles, etc. But he didn't do any of those through a qualification or a trade, or etc. Because there isn't one. So he's taken all of those away. The irony is, after roughly 10, 11 years in working in the sector, he's now used that in an application for a master's in built environment or something at one of the universities. So he's going to make the shift without ever having done any of that, intending to ever do a qualification.
Yeah, brilliant. Great example. Thank you. Yeah. Craig, I wanted you to talk a bit about employability skills, and obviously that's been something that has been a particular focus and a bit of a tussle at times, I guess, in the vet sector. And Morgan asks if any of the panellists, but I'll start with you first, have any examples of organisations in different industry sectors working together to identify employability credentials that might help workers move between different industries. Do you have any insights or experiences to share?
I have one example, but it was more forced than sort of upfront collaboration. And it was when Ford closed down their assembly plant in Melbourne. Of course, the Victorian government put a lot of effort into transferring people. I well remember the story of the person who ended up in laboratory testing equipment and cleaning in a hospital, cleaning and conducting tests, because it was a devotion to process and safety, replicability and all that sort of stuff was the transferable element. Now, I guess when we sometimes talk about employability, we think we're all going to be jazzy and, the funks and all that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of employers say, well, I want somebody who I know that I can rely upon to get the process from go to woe, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we often degrade that or don't recognise that. But that's sometimes some of the employability. I guess the emerging one is what we mean by digital literacy, digital skills, because they're going to cross all industries. And how do we do that? And I think that's a bit of a live issue at the moment. I know the government's working with the Australian Industry Standards Group to look at a model that could be rolled out. That's not necessarily aligned with an occupation, but is a personal capability that you can apply in any context, really.
And I'm not sure if we've got them in the audience, so to speak, but if you're not familiar with the work that Fathom AI do.
Yeah.
They've got a great tool, artificial intelligence tool, looking at skills and capabilities in particular occupations and those in similar occupations. So I think Simon might have written it down. If you don't know it, it's faethm.ai. And the OECD, right, differently. So one's a private Australian provider.
Yep.
Oh, they're in the exhibitor space, Cherie. There you go, if you haven't been to see them. And it's also something that at a government level, the OECD is also trying to look at. So I suspect we'll see a bit more examples in answer to your question, Morgan. So thank you for that.
And sorry, if I could just pop in, they've also done some work for the Vietnamese government, believe it or not. Because a government in a country like that is saying, how can we do the technological leap?
Yeah, and governments across Canada and various things. So it's well worth it. Go and have a look in the exhibitor space. I didn't know they were there, but tell them I said I think they're doing very good things, and have a look. And anyone else, Eve or Simon, on employability skills that you've seen?
Look, the resources sector has actually been pretty good at this for a number of years, because they go through various stages in, setting up a mine and establishing it, and then moving on to the mining side of it, and then with the extraction and all the rest of it. So one of the things they've always done is actually work very hard so that you could have 2, 3, 4 years work at a mine setting it up. So you're a welder or something from a construction site, etc., but applying it under the ground or even above the ground, but in very, very specific scenarios. Then how do we move you across to a different organisation, which is more traditional construction, or it could be infrastructure based, so building roads and all the rest of it, so that when the cycle swings itself around again, you actually can come back into the mining sector. You haven't lost the skills, you've in fact built on them. That's probably the thing they've done best.
Terrific. Simon, you can answer that one, or you could be a bit more philosophical, and you might like to answer Alan's question, your statement, respond to that the future has been here since yesterday, and we've got more of it coming tomorrow. I'll leave it to you which one you would prefer to comment on.
Sure, I might do both, but and hello to Alan, who again I know, and again I haven't planted people in the crowd to ask questions.
That's
but,
all right. I know Alan too. Not nearly as well as you, I'm sure.
And I learnt a lot of what I know about micro credentials from Alan, who's an absolute leader in the field. So certainly agree with what he says. But just going back to Fathom, I've worked with them both at Deakin when we conceptualised our micro credential offer there. And then more recently at Chartered Accountants, where we got them, we applied their analytics, if you like, to the Australian Bureau of Statistics job data for accountants to look at the impact of automation, to make sure we were framing our capabilities so that they were future focused and highlighted the capabilities our members would need over the next 5 or 10 years to help them adapt and remain relevant. And that capability model will ultimately form the basis of a new micro-credentialing offer. And for me, in terms of that cross-industry piece, and the question from Morgan, who I also worked with at Deakin, so hello, Morgan.
I
don't know Jeffrey, who's just posed a question though. So
I do.
You do. Oh, good. But that transferability, I think, really comes into play in those enterprise skills or professional skills. The communication, problem solving, critical thinking, digital fluency, however you want to frame those, because they're ultimately transferable or portable across any industry and any job. So I think the sooner industry embraces micro credentials in those employability skills, the more value we'll start to see in micro credentials from a workforce perspective.
Brilliant, thank you. And for those who haven't seen Jeffrey's comment, Jeffrey, I think it's okay for me to say, is from Scouts Australia, and talking about a number of youth-based organisations who are working on non-formal education, which builds employability skills as well as helping develop people into good community members. And I think that's really important work that they do as well, and to be recognised. So my last question for you, unless we get others coming in, the Simon Hann fan club, my last question for the panel is for each of you to give us advice based on your experience on how providers and industry can do more with micro-credentials. What's the next bit to push things forward? Who wants to go first on that? Any takers? No, they've all gone quiet. Okay, I'm going to pick on people. Eve, you were about to say something, so I'm going to go to you.
Oh, was I? Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. My facial expression dogged me in. Look, I was actually musing and thinking about it. Part of it, I guess, is that we've got to destigmatise the concept of micro-credentials, because we've built up a culture in Australia or in Western societies where we have this massive race for certification. So we effectively accumulate qualifications like we accumulate wealth. The trouble is that they're not always something that you can cash in and make a dollar out of. And the other part of it is that we often end up being so overqualified that we don't get jobs at the level to which we. So if we can break that sort of concept, that mindset down, and say to people, it's okay to do little bits and pieces. It's okay to have a jigsaw as your educational life. And as you find the gap there, you've got a gap there, and oh, yep, that's the blue sky with the hailstorms coming across it. Then you slot it in and do that one, and yep, there's the bird that's landing on the bridge, and let's go and do that there. And at the end of your life, you've got this wonderful vista. And that's, if we can actually take that approach, I think, then you've got a concept of building blocks. You've got a concept of accumulation. You are actually putting value in every tiny component, rather than just saying, "Oh, I've got to have it today. I've got to have a degree. I've got to have a diploma. I've got to have a master's. I've got to have a doctorate," whatever it happens to be. To me, that's the biggest thing that both industry and education need to be working on. And obviously, for education providers, that's probably their greatest challenge, because it's everything that they've worked towards for the last many centuries is being flipped on its head by saying, let's destigmatise, micro credentials.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions. Wendy and Cheryl, I've seen your questions, but I'm just going to go with our final panel question, and then I'll pick up those. Craig, your thoughts?
I'm genuinely perplexed over this whole issue about micro-credentials and working with industry, but I think they've got great power, because at the underpinning all of this is technology democratises. It unpacks hierarchies and the like, and unfortunately hierarchies that governments set, et cetera, and who is a government to get between what an individual thinks they need and can access conveniently as a micro-credential, preferably as a accredited micro-credential. So how we as governments pull all that together and say we're still supporting the individual to advance in their life, we're helping out industry and all that sort of stuff, is actually quite an interesting challenge, because the issue in VET, we've got a top-down bit of logic, and we assume that if it's defined somewhere in the alleyways of Canberra, it'll deliver a result in the back streets of Karratha. I'm not actually sure that's the case. So, yeah, I'm genuinely perplexed in public policy terms about how we go forward with this. But one thing is clear: it is here, and we've got to figure out what's the best way to do it for industry, but for individuals. Sorry, I've rabbited on a bit there.
No, that's all good. Simon, to you, what's the thing that's going to move this forward? Or you might want to comment in the qualifications and micro-credential space that Eve and Craig have taken us to.
Sure. For me, it's around linking micro-credentials to employability. So, I mean, ultimately, most of us study because we want to get a job, or we want to get a better job where we are, or we want to get a new job. It's to advance yourself from a vocational career perspective. I think when we get to the stage where micro-credentials start to form the basis upon which employers make decisions around those job selection pieces, if you like. So, I think the ultimate dream is that a position description strips out all the fluff and says, these are the capabilities that this position needs. And as an employee candidate, I can come along and say, I've got micro-credentials that map up to each of those capabilities. And that's an evidence piece, if you like. And I think that adds incredible value and accuracy and improvement in the employment process generally, but will absolutely elevate the value of micro-credentials, because people will ultimately see the motivation and reward in engaging and getting micro-credentials.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm sticking with you, Simon. Thank you for that. I agree.
Can I throw something provocative in?
Oh, you can. Yes, go for your life.
And Craig will know the figure better than me, but we've got several thousand vocational qualifications. in Australia. And that's pretty much a common trend across the world where they have vocational frameworks. And the question is why? If we actually started to trim back the number of vocational qualifications, and instead of saying you get a certificate in, you get a diploma in this, therefore you are job ready, which you are to a degree, but you're also not to another degree, and started pushing the micro-credential so that you're actually focusing on what do I need for the job, like Simon's saying, then we're probably going to actually encourage a change in politic, a change in providers' mindsets, but also we're going to be far more responsive to consumers being both employers and employees.
We are, and I'm going to curtail that discussion. That's a conversation for another webinar because it's an important question. Actually, we have thousands more qualifications than most other countries even put together.
Yep.
You're right, but I do want to go to Wendy, Cheryl, and Jennifer's comments before we wrap up. So Wendy, who's another member of the Simon fan club, you've brought them all today, Simon. She's thrown out the question that is actually, I'm going to say might be too hard to define, which is how do you define that we're all using micro-credentials interchangeably? Eve, you talked about 6 to 8 week courses. Heavens, I've just done some analysis. You might get a certificate 3 out of those in some in some places. Other places, a micro-credential is literally a few hours or a day. Anybody want to jump in and try and solve the definitional issue? Just one, go. Yes.
The minister can't get it right, so he thinks undergraduate certificates are micro-credentials, so I'm not sure that we can. I mean, I think the only way you do it is take education out of it, because education loves to have acronyms for everything and 105 different ways of saying the same thing. So I don't think we're ever going to escape it. At the end of the day, we're going to have a myriad of terms that describe the same thing.
All right,
Today,
I'll take
tomorrow,
that.
Eve, I'll come back in a sort of quasi-controversial way. Does that mean the market will sort out the benefit for the individual? And I'm not sure it can do that. So there has to be a role for government in there somewhere.
Okay, Simon,
anyway, I'll leave it there.
Simon?
Yeah, hello, Wendy. No solution. I've talked about this many times. And I suppose I come back to ultimately when you look at the value of a micro-credential, you're looking at the reputation of who's issued the micro-credential and the underlying assessment methodology. What is it telling me that this person can do, and how is that assessed? And again, I think it's just going to be a market maturity and market education process, but unfortunately not as simple as the well-known for a long time, what a diploma, bachelor's and master's looks like. So a lot of work to do.
Very good. And we're close to our final warning. I just wanted to go to Cheryl asked, digital badges. Do you have a view on these? Anyone? One of you? They're good, they're bad, they're irrelevant, they're just a thing. Simon?
For me, they're the representation of the micro-credential. So, equivalent to the testama or the bit of paper. It's what lies underneath that counts. But digital badging is a really clever way to people to be able to, as I said before, be able to determine who's issued that credential, check that it was, genuinely and validly issued and what the criteria were. So, very valuable for that aspect of micro-credentialing.
Very good. And Jennifer talked about the Google certificates. If you haven't seen them, they're now not just out there doing micro-credentials. They're 6-month short courses taking on undergraduate degrees in the US. So Google certificates if you're not across those. Grant, did you want to wrap up and send us off to the next panel session? Oh, we've got more questions.
I did. Look, fantastic, Claire. Thank you.
Yep.
No, look, thank you so much. I was in the whole session there, just sitting in the background, organising, getting our next panel. Look, fantastic. You marshalled the troops extremely well, which is difficult to do with this group of people, I know, but well done. And the responses were fantastic, and the chat that was going on was terrific as well, as we've had all day. So again, Eve, Craig, Simon, Claire, thank you so much for being part of today. It's been excellent. And we look forward to continuing the conversations after today. Right. For everyone who's online at the moment, we have one more panel session to go. Don't miss it. It's a brilliant one. They've all been sitting in the background for the last half an hour chatting away, so I think we might be able to shut these guys up as well, I think so. But please join that one in 2:45, and it'll be in the panel session as well. So thank you, guys. Oh, look, one last thing for the exhibitors. If you haven't had a chance to get to the EdTech exhibitors, please do so. There's There's lots of downloads of documents, frameworks, all sorts of stuff in there. Chat to the guys at Fathom, as we were mentioning before. And certainly please take a little bit of time if you can to drop in there. We'll share their details anyway after the fact. So thanks again, guys, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Then somehow we bow out.